Todd and Ryan, welcome to the Leanpub launch video for fixing your Scrum, practical solutions to common Scrum problems. I was wondering if you could take a moment just to talk a little bit about yourselves, about who you are, and who your book is for. Todd, why don't you go first?
Ryan's always better at doing introductions than I am. But I'm Todd Miller. I've been a professional Scrum trainer through Scrum.org for 8 years now. Background in software engineering. I guess that's Ryan will add to that. Introductions are not my strong suit.
Yeah, so I'm Ryan Ripley. So Todd and I have been professional Scrum trainers for 7-8 years now. Prior to that, we both started as software developers, worked our way through companies. I went more of a project management, executive leadership route. Todd went more of a developer to product owner to executive route. But we both landed in a very similar place as professional Scrum trainers, as authors. And so what we've tried to do is take the better part of the past 20 years, compress that into a 250-page book of all the mistakes we've made, and then how, hopefully the more mature Todd and Ryan, how we would handle the situations today within a Scrum context.
Yeah, it's a really great book. We were really glad to see it when it sort of popped up on Leanpub. We've had a few sort of Scrum authors, on the podcast and on these videos before. One thing I really like about your book is that you talk about how things can go wrong. And one of the reasons I bring that up is that sort of there's a lot of people who are on the delivering end of Scrum, and then there are some people who are their only experience with it is being on the receiving end of it. And if they're on the receiving end of poorly delivered Scrum, they don't like it. So what can make Scrum go wrong in an organization?
I think there's a lot of anti-patterns we bring up. I think a lot of them flow back to a Scrum Master doing their job poorly. I think when a Scrum Master, first of all, just to have a person in a Scrum Master role who has never delivered software or product before, and who doesn't have the coaching capabilities to work within the team and to steal Todd's term, pop the Scrum bubble and work outside the team. When we have people who fulfill these accountabilities and refuse to work with executives and leadership and management, thinking that they're the problem instead of a partner. All those things manifest into the hundreds of anti-patterns that we talk about, and some of the solutions we've seen. But I think a lot of it flows from a Scrum Master misbehaving in an organization.
Yeah, and to add to that, what happens in a lot of those instances is people forget about the purpose of it to begin with, which is to deliver.
Yep.
Right? The purpose is to deliver in Scrum, and to deliver with high quality, to deliver experiments into production that hopefully customers like. But you can have all the fancy retrospectives in the world if you're not delivering products. You're really not doing it right.
Yeah, and when we're talking about delivering products here, we're talking mostly about delivering software products, right? And so you've got this sort of like dynamic where there's like, maybe a sort of like executive layer that like needs, or even a sales layer that wants something out there. And then you've got, a team of developers, programmers, and designers and things like that, and someone in between them who needs to make sure that those interests align, motivations stay right, and things like that. And Scrum, of course, is a way of sort of like making that happen faster and better.
Yeah, it's definitely a good vehicle to get to done, right? We're trying to, most people listening to this and reading the book, they work in organizations where it's almost a minor miracle that anything actually gets out the door, And so what Scrum can do, if done well, which is what we're trying to ultimately do, right? We're trying to help teams use this as a vehicle to delivery. But if they solve some of these anti-patterns, I think they have a better shot at getting things out the door, into a customer's hand where they can validate value, figure out if they're having a good impact, and then adjust if they're not, which is all we're really trying to do, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
And Len, you're mentioning all these kind of like people outside of what would be a Scrum team. We've talked sales, maybe marketing, executives. They all have their opinions on what should go into the product, right? And in Scrum, you have a product owner who is making the decisions on what they think is valuable. I think something important to point out there is what they think is valuable, but you don't know. And so you could have a really good idea. It's on the product backlog and your team executes it, delivers it into production, and no one uses it. Right. And so we'll talk about how everything on the product backlog is a hypothesis. And the idea behind Scrum is to quickly get things into production and test those hypotheses. Right. Because nothing is a guarantee. Ryan and I joke around that it's not Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams. Right. If you build it, it's not guaranteed that people are going to use it. So that's kind of our running joke with that. Plus, we like the movie.
Yeah.
Well, and Len, I think your question was also, it's kind of deceptively simple, right? It could just be, it could just be a Scrum Master misbehaving. But, to Todd's point, how are they using the framework itself? We see a lot of organizations that will take a framework like Scrum and just try to turn it into a project management framework. Chop the project plan, take their Microsoft project plan, chop it into a bunch of pretty little pieces, throw them into sprints, and away you go. And I think a lot of the community has forgotten that Ken Schwaber created Scrum in order to be opportunistic in the marketplace, right? You're using Scrum because you see an opportunity, you want to execute on it, you want to beat the competition to it, and ultimately capture that market share through the release of a product. And so that opportunistic nature has also, that whole idea has just drifted out of the whole space. And, people are just chopping up project plans into pretty little pieces and not realizing, no, we're here to win. We're using Scrum as a competitive advantage, not just a project management framework.
Yeah, it's interesting in my experience interviewing authors who've written books about Scrum. The more serious they start sounding, the more competitive they start talking. And your book is a great tool for people who are like at that level or reaching for that level or wonder if that level exists, and it definitely does. The book is Fixing Your Scrum: Practical Solutions to Common Scrum Problems. I recommend it to anyone interested in the topic. And thank you very much, guys, for being on this launch video today.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.